Hello Year 11 and welcome to our second revision lesson on Romeo and Juliet, and today we're going to be taking a look at the key themes. Feel free to record your notes however it's best for you, so if you prefer to record them as a poster or a spider diagram, that's absolutely fine, whatever works best for you. So get yourself your resources together and then press play when you're ready. Now, the first theme we're going to look at today is that of love and hate, or if you like, love versus hate, and how that is closely interlinked throughout our play. So if you cast your minds to Act 1, Scene 5, there's a phrase there which really summarises this nicely for us. So we have Juliet speaking after the Capulet party where she has met Romeo, but remember when she meets him at the party, she doesn't know that he's a Montague and she only comes to that realisation in Scene 5. And so we have this phrase, my only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown and known too late. So here we have Shakespeare using that antithesis, that rhetorical device that puts two opposite ideas together to achieve a contrasting effect. So here we have Juliet saying that she feels that Romeo is her only love, will be her only love, but of course he's the son of Lord Montague, he's part of that family that she is supposed to hate, and this really emphasises for us the instant tragedy of their situation. And indeed, throughout the play, the hatred between the two families casts that permanent shadow over their brief relationship and subsequent marriage. Now, structurally, Shakespeare deliberately juxtaposes moments of intense hatred next to those of passionate love. And an example of this is present in Act 1, Scene 5, when Tybalt spots Romeo attending the Capulet party. And remember, Romeo has attended that party without any invitation, so Tybalt takes this as a huge insult. Remember, he tries to persuade his uncle to allow him to challenge this hated intruder, but his uncle asserts his authority over him, and following that failure, he states that I will withdraw, but this intrusion shall, now seeming sweet, convert to bitterest gall. And then this is then immediately followed by Romeo commencing the famous shared love sonnet with Juliet, and which is laced with that tender religious imagery. So we have the juxtaposition here of if I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this. So both of those occurring one after the other. And the effect of that extreme juxtaposition is to create that dramatic tension for the audience, and also to remind them that any relationship between Romeo and Juliet is likely to be doomed. And remember, through the use of dramatic irony and the references in the prologue, we as the audience already know that any relationship is likely to result in considerate peril for all of those involved. And additionally, Shakespeare's use of this contrasting language further emphasises the play's persistent intermingling of love and hate. So another example of love and hate being juxtaposed is present at the end of Act 3, Scene 1 and the beginning of Act 3, Scene 2. So if we cast our minds to Act 3, Scene 1, remember this is where Romeo's well-intentioned interventions with the sword-fighting Tybalt and Mercutio have actually led to Mercutio's death and then subsequently to Romeo's slaying of Tybalt. And then we had Lady Capulet calling for Romeo's execution, and the scene ended with the prince declaring that Romeo would be exiled from Verona and that if he ever stepped foot in Verona again, he would be put to death. And it ends with this line, mercy but murders, pardoning those that kill. So really emphasising that actually if you forgive the act of murder, then you are paving the way for further murders to be committed. And then that final line of Act 3, Scene 1 is followed by Act 3, Scene 2, opening with Juliet. And Juliet is speaking structurally as a soliloquy, remembering that's where you are speaking your innermost thoughts. And this is where Juliet is desperate for Romeo to return and consummate their relationship. And she states, gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds, towards Phoebus's lodging. And this imagery refers to the horses drawing the chariot of Phoebus Apollo, the sun god. So she is desperate for the sun to set quicker so that her night of passionate lovemaking can begin. Of course, though, remember at this point she has no idea that her husband has just killed her cousin. So a very clear example of hatred into love, and that stern statement by the prince being followed by expressions of desire. And juxtaposition of love and hate continue right the way to the end of the play. So if we now take a look at Act 5, Scene 3, and remember this is the scene when Romeo has journeyed to Verona in the mistaken belief that Juliet is dead. So as he approaches the Capulet tomb, he's met by Paris, and remember Paris knows nothing of Romeo and Juliet's relationship. So he mistakenly believes that Romeo has arrived there to insult the Capulet family further, and he addresses Romeo with, stop thy unhallowed toil, vile Montague, can vengeance be pursued further than death? Now, despite Romeo trying to placate Paris, this results in Paris's death. All Romeo intended, of course, was to spend his final moments with Juliet, to pay respect to Juliet before taking the poison that he had acquired from the apothecary. So overall, these juxtapositions of love and hate result in a compelling drama as we switch between one extreme emotion and another. Furthermore, Shakespeare's use of dramatic irony injects proceedings with sharp poignancy. We know, don't we, when Romeo and Juliet meet in Act 1, that their families absolutely loathe each other. And initially, of course, they don't know that they're from opposing families, and we wonder how they're going to react when they find out. This means that their meeting is tinged with excitement, but also with a sense of foreboding. Similarly, in Act 3, Scene 5, the audience watch Romeo and Juliet as they wake from consummating their marriage. But we watch them with the knowledge from Act 3, Scene 4 that Capulet has arranged for Juliet to marry Paris. So we as the audience have to conclude that these loving scenes are likely to be short-lived and perhaps never repeated. So not only does Shakespeare present these two extreme emotions to us, he also probes what it means to be in love and whether we can truly accept that just because a character says they're in love, they are really in love. And we've talked about this in the past at quite some length, how some professions of love we need to take with a healthy dose of skepticism. So with that in mind, let's have a look at Act 5, Scene 3. And this is the scene where Paris is outside the tomb of Juliet. He's armed with flowers, and remember, for the time being, he is planning to ritualistically spread those flowers in a tender gesture towards his fiancée, and he's planning to do that every night. And he is interrupted. And we have this quote, "What cursed foot wanders this way tonight to cross my obsequies and true love's right?" So here he's indignantly questioning who is interrupting what he has planned to do to honour his fiancée. Furthermore, we need to remember that Paris and Juliet have only actually had one encounter where they speak to each other, which is that just by chance encounter at Friar Lawrence's cell. So let's take a look at a quote from there, Act 4, Scene 1. And Paris, speaking to Juliet, says, "That may be, must be, love on Thursday next." So the language that Paris is using here, this really indicates for us that he is much like Lord Capulet, intending to dominate and control Juliet. So in the conversation between Juliet and Paris at Friar Lawrence's cell, Paris does use terms of endearment and love when addressing Juliet, but considering he stresses the compulsory nature of their marriage, it does make us question how we can possibly take Paris's claim of true love seriously, particularly when you add into that the almost total lack of contact between them in the play. And remember, we've also seen this present in Romeo, and we've questioned whether Romeo actually knows what it means to be truly in love. So if we go to Act 1, Scene 1, Romeo actually in this scene says very little about his supposed adored love, Rosaline, but instead makes references to Cupid. And this suggests that he is thoroughly enjoying presenting himself as a cruelly frustrated lover. And he tells Benvolio, "She'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow, she hath Dian's wit, and in strong proof of chastity, well armed, from love's weak childish bow, she lives uncharmed." So, Cupid, the god of love, traditionally shown as a chubby, blindfolded boy, ready to unleash his arrows to make humans fall in love. Diane, the goddess of chastity. So on one level, Romeo is implying that Rosaline is immune to Cupid's arrows. She's clever, she's ingenious, she's as resourceful as the goddess of chastity in repelling male attack. However, in Shakespeare's time, wit could also be used to describe a vagina. So on another level, Romeo's use of imagery descends into a crude suggestion that his supposed loved one has a vagina which is literally impossible to defeat. And just to take a moment to consider how that language compares to when Romeo first sees Juliet, where he uses that stunned, reverent, religious imagery when he sees her for the first time. I think it's really clear for us that his feelings of love for Rosaline were nothing more than the product of lust-fueled immaturity. So the play is more than just about the world's most famous lovers from the world's most famously opposed families. It's also about the temptation for so many of us to delude ourselves about love and being in love, and those glorious opportunities for extravagant imagery and moody, melodramatic, solitary hours for those who decide that they have indeed been hit by Cupid's arrow. And now let's move on to the theme of parents and children, or old versus young. I'm going to start with Lord Capulet, and we are going to have a look at Act 1, Scene 2, where, remember, even Capulet is capable of being reasonable and balanced, which is in stark contrast to Act 3, Scene 5, where he's using that very violent language towards Juliet. So here Juliet is described with a term of infection, with "My child is yet a stranger in the world. She hath not seen the change of 14 years. Let 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we may think her ripe to be a bride." So affectionate terms when describing his daughter, saying that at the moment he feels that she is too young to be wed, and that she needs time. She needs another couple of years to gain experience and perhaps develop physically as well until she is ready to be married. So just as we wouldn't eat a piece of fruit before it was ripe, Juliet shouldn't be rushed into marriage at such a tender age. So here Capulet has spoken very calmly, quite eloquently, and very considerately. And an Elizabethan audience, much like an audience today, would have felt quite shocked at a girl as young as 13 being considered for marriage. So by following Elizabethan convention, Capulet seems reasonable. But of course, we know that doesn't last. And the considerate language continues in Act 1, Scene 2, when Lord Capulet instructs Paris to "But woo her, gentle Paris, get her heart, my will to her consent is but a part." So here clearly Lord Capulet is saying that any future marriage would need to have not only his agreement, Paris's agreement, but also Juliet's agreement too. And it's important here to note how eloquently, how fluently Lord Capulet is speaking, and his words in fact sit perfectly within the iambic pentameter structure, showing how calm and level-headed he is at this point. But of course we know, don't we, that Lord Capulet does not stay level-headed, calm and considerate throughout this play. In Act 3, Scene 5, you'll see a very different structure to his speech. So he goes from somebody who, when he is calm and level-headed and considerate, somebody who speaks fluently using the iambic pentameter and rhyming couplets, to somebody who is violently abusive and now bombarding, spitting these words out at his daughter. And you'll see the omission of the conjunctives between the clauses results in this hurried rhythm and sort of angry effect to the speech. So he says, "Speak not, reply not, do not answer me, my fingers itch." So very clearly telling Juliet, don't talk, don't interrupt, and also carrying that threat of physical violence. So Shakespeare furthermore emphasises that Lord Capulet is a parent who is out of control, who is breathlessly issuing curse after curse without any sort of sense of proportion or rationality. A parent who, rather than lose face, declares that he would prefer his daughter to hang, beg, starve, die in the streets, emphasising the relentlessness of his paranoid fury. So Shakespeare principally uses the relationship between Lord Capulet and his daughter Juliet to explore conflict between parents and their children, but he also uses Lady Capulet, but not to the same level of violent threat as her husband. But ultimately, Lady Capulet is on Lord Capulet's side, and this is nowhere else more evident than in Act 3, Scene 5, when Juliet has turned to her mother to beg her for her support, and she departs with this crushing couplet, "Talk not to me, for I'll not speak a word, do as thou wilt, for I have done with thee." Now let's start to take a look at the theme of religion. So religious images are used regularly to give greater weight and gravitas to Romeo and Juliet's feelings for each other. And in this extract from Act 1, Scene 5, Romeo uses 3 religious terms explicitly. "If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this: my lips to blushing pilgrims ready stand, to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss." So, profane, meaning showing no respect for a god or religion, often through language. Shrine, a place of worship that is holy because of a connection with a holy person or object. And pilgrims, people who make a journey, often a long and difficult one, to a special place for religious reasons. So here Romeo is figuratively and repeatedly calling Juliet sacred, and in the taking of her hand he recognises that he may be showing insufficient respect because, in his own words, he calls her a holy shrine, a symbol of religious beauty. So, is Romeo using religious imagery to flatter Juliet, to persuade her to perhaps a future sexual encounter, or is Romeo using religious language to express these new, deeply held emotions that he feels at the sight of Juliet? And the fact that Juliet is able to respond using the same religious imagery, and that the pair are able to seamlessly, smoothly alternate sections and lines from an iambic pentameter sonnet, may indeed suggest that the more optimistic interpretation is correct. These two are in the process of developing an extraordinary spiritual connection, otherwise known as love. But of course, just because the tragic hero of a play calls his 13-year-old heroine a holy shrine or a dear saint, this does not make either of them particularly religious, just familiar with and able to manipulate religious terminology for their own purposes. So throughout the play, the language, rites and people connected to religion seem to be used in order to further human desires and emotions rather than develop a closer relationship with God, which you could argue should be the main purpose. Take, for example, in Act 2, Scene 4, where Romeo is planning with the nurse for Juliet to tell her parents that she needs to go to confession so that they can secretly be married by Friar Lawrence. And similarly, in Act 3, Scene 5, following that violent exchange with her father, the presence of religious institutions acts as a facilitator for deceit and parental disobedience. So she instructs her nurse to go to her mother and tell her that she's gone to seek absolution for her sins against her father at Friar Lawrence's cell. But of course, she hasn't gone there to confess her sins and be absolved. She's gone there because she's come to the realization that he may be the only character left in the play that will be able to provide her with any type of assistance. And now let's take a look at our main religious character in the play. So Friar Lawrence's role in the play seems to be far more that of a go-between and a facilitator for the two foolish young lovers. His exchanges are littered with conventional religious exclamations, and he has an appropriately reverent attitude towards marriage. But Friar Lawrence's role in the play seems to be far more to act as a pander than as a devoted man of God. It's he who agrees to marry the young couple. It's he who reassures a distraught, just banished Romeo. And it's he who ensures that the marriage is consummated. So here in Act 3, Scene 3, we have Friar Lawrence ensuring that Romeo and Juliet's marriage is consummated with "Go, get thee to thy love, as was decreed, ascend her chamber hence, and comfort her." And then in Act 3, Scene 5, we have Juliet feeling like her very life depends upon Friar Lawrence. So Shakespeare's presentation of Friar Lawrence is ambivalent. He does, doesn't he, seem to be doing the right thing. And if we cast our minds to Act 2, Scene 3, where he states, "This alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancour to pure love." So here he's trying to justify his decision to marry the young couple in the hope that their alliance, their marriage, will actually prove to be the thing that's needed to end the feud between the two families. But let's consider this. This has been described as an ancient grudge. We've had brawls in the streets of Verona. We've had the citizens being disturbed. We've had the old men, the two lords, reaching for their swords. So it's quite a naive thought, really, on his part that actually this marriage will be like a waving a magic wand to end this feud. So Friar Lawrence has a good reputation in Verona, which is demonstrated in Act 4, Scene 2, where Capulet is lavishly praising him. But can you imagine what Capulet would be saying if he only knew what Friar Lawrence had been instrumental in? So remember, Friar Lawrence has married his only child to the son of his most hated enemy without his permission. He has encouraged Romeo to consummate that marriage, and he is concocting that elaborate plan which will actually fool Lord Capulet into believing that his daughter is dead. And under the guise of acting for the best, isn't there a sense that Friar Lawrence seems rather too ready to deceive or devise elaborate deceptions for a trusted man of God? And that in Act 4, Scene 5, when faced with the supposedly dead Juliet, doesn't his implicitly lying glib statement that Juliet is in a better place, i.e. heaven, come a little too easily? Is this a genuine Christian, or someone like Romeo, like Juliet, who's all too prepared to use religious language and notions in order to further his own ambitions, and in this case to protect himself from accusations of impropriety? And then we have Friar Lawrence's extraordinary proposal to Juliet in Act 5, Scene 3, where upon finding her Romeo self-poisoned, he suggests to her that she could join a nunnery. Is this his way of silencing Juliet and getting her out of the way? It's followed up when he hears people approaching by saying, "I dare no longer stay," and in effect he abandons Juliet to commit suicide. So ultimately we question whether he is only interested in himself and his own safety. So to some extent, Shakespeare's ambivalent presentation of Friar Lawrence can be ascribed to Elizabethan Protestant suspicions of Catholicism. Many Elizabethans saw in Friar Lawrence their stereotype of the scheming Italian Catholic priest. Their jaundiced preconception would be confirmed by his actions, most obviously the way he readily breaks church law in secretly conducting the marriage of a 13-year-old girl, and then deceives her parents with a dangerous plan of his own devising.